Hello and welcome to a new lesson in arousal and the inverted U theory. Just a reminder in terms of these PowerPoint presentations, so the yellow text boxes referring to the task for students, the green text boxes are the note-taking sections for students, the blue text boxes are the differentiation tasks, and the red text boxes are for the teaching and learning strategies and ideas for the practitioner. So this syllabus, what are we asking about in this topic? We need to know about what arousal actually is, so a definition for that key term arousal. You need to be aware and comfortable and happy to be able to draw the inverted U theory, so using the Y and X axis appropriately. And you also need to be able to describe the inverted U theory graph. Okay, so once you've been able to draw it, understand the relationship between arousal and performance levels. And ultimately, you need to be able to link the inverted U theory to the different skills. In this topic as well, we'll also look at the coping strategies. So how we deal and how we cope with our arousal levels and how that will impact on performance. Okay, so first things first, we need to know the definition of arousal. So when we think about that term arousal, sporting arousal, we're talking about a physical and mental state of alertness, readiness, varying from deep sleep to intense excitement and alertness. So it's this state of readiness that we may or may not be in, which refers to as our arousal levels. Arousal can obviously affect both the physical and the mental state of the performer. Okay, so physically speaking, think of if we're high in sporting arousal, then we're going to, for example, increase our heart rate, and we also might perspirate, we might sweat. So just want you to pause the video here. Can you think of any signs of psychological, so to do with the mind, any kind of signs of when we're at a state of high sporting arousal? Pause your video here. Okay, so a few things you might have come up with, thinking about when someone is in that state of alertness and readiness. Okay, high levels of that. Cognitively, we may be sharp, we may be focused, we may be really concentrated, we might be quite serious in our kind of behaviour and in our nature. So those are some of the signs of the psychological aspects in terms of high sporting arousal. So let's look at the inverted U theory. Okay, so the diagram on the right hand side you will need to draw and to get down, and I'll explain that in a second. Ultimately, this theory sort of visualizes how the performer can be both under aroused and also over aroused. Okay, so ultimately the key things that you need to take away from this particular theory is ultimately as the arousal increases, so you can see the red line there, okay, as that increases, okay, so we have the y-axis at the bottom, okay, between low and high for the arousal, the x-axis on the left hand side for performance, low and high. Okay, so as arousal increases, so does performance. So you can see that red arrow going upwards. Okay, as arousal increases, so does performance. Ultimately, this gets to a certain point, and we call this an optimum, okay, or optimal arousal. So this is the perfect level in terms of our arousal levels, our state of alertness and readiness in comparison to performance. Okay, if our state of alertness and readiness gets too much, so if we get over aroused, then ultimately that's going to have a negative impact on our performance, and ultimately our performance will decrease, as you can see there with the line, with the curve now going downwards in regards to the performance levels. So again, I want you to copy out this diagram. That's really important. In your own words, I want you to explain what do we mean by optimum or optimal arousal. Pause your video here. Okay, so when we're talking about optimal arousal, we're talking about the perfect condition. We call it in the zone. Okay, so when we're in the zone as an athlete, okay, as a performer, okay, we're in that perfect level of arousal. Okay, so our performance becomes free flowing, it becomes easy. We don't even think about it. Time actually goes quickly when we're in the zone, so to speak. Okay, where our movements, our technique, our whole performance is just free flowing. It's just everything just seems a lot easier, seems perfect. Okay, so that's what we mean by trying to be in that optimum arousal level. Let's look at how the inverted U changes with the different skills. Again, on the right hand side, you can see the diagram in terms of fine skills and gross skills. Okay, so just remind yourself on what we mean by both of those things. So a fine skill is an acute skill, isn't it? It's something that is precise in terms of precision. So we may be looking, for example, at a fine skill such as archery, okay, where we need high levels of accuracy. Okay, we need a steady hand, okay, and there'll be fine, small movements, whereas gross skills are big muscle movements, aren't they? So it says there the optimal perfect level of arousal varies for the different sporting skills. So we have different skills in different sports, and ultimately we need different levels of arousal for them. So for things like fine skills, you can see there the inverted U is a little closer towards the low level of arousal. Okay, so we're looking at that optimal level of arousal being lower in comparison to gross skills. Whereas gross skills, as I said, require sort of big muscle movements, they need power, they need strength, and ultimately they need higher levels of arousal, as you can see there on the diagram. So it's important again that you get down that diagram. Then once you've done that, just try and give some examples of other fine skills and other gross skills. All right, so let's move on. Let's try and apply the inverted U theory. You come up with some different examples. So let's see if you came up with any of these examples for that matter. So look at the different examples that I'm going to put on the screen now and decide whether you think it's a high level or low level of arousal that's required for these different skills. Okay, so think of clay pigeon shooting, for example. Okay, that skill in particular, does that require high or low levels of arousal? Think of a rugby tackle next. Okay, again, does that require high or low levels of arousal? Move on to weightlifting next. Okay, does that require high or low levels of arousal? And then finally, snooker, putting a ball in snooker. Does that require high or low levels of arousal? Okay, so hopefully you've answered that and you've noticed that the clay pigeon shooting and snooker in particular, they require low levels of arousal. Okay, so we don't, in order for us to be in our optimum zone or in the zone for that matter, okay, we need lower levels of arousal there because they are fine skills. Okay, whereas the gross skills will be things like a rugby tackle where we need to be prepared, don't we, physically and psychologically for that contact, so we require obviously a higher level of arousal, and weightlifting as well. Okay, that's a sport, it's a skill, isn't it, which requires big gross motor movements to be able to lift that weight, and ultimately we need a higher level of arousal for that. Okay, so let's do some exam practice. So what it says there, what levels of training does a diver need in their sport? Okay, so think of a diver now. Pause your video here, see if you can answer that question. Okay, so again, using your model, your inverted U theory model, okay, here I think it's important to note that for a diver, okay, this is a tough question because ultimately for a diver, we need, and diving in particular, takes in different aspects, doesn't it? Because ultimately we do need some fine movements within diving, okay, because it's a bit of a gymnastic activity, isn't it? In regards to we need to make sure that we place our body limbs correctly when we're doing that somersault, for example, or the tuck or the pike in regards to the task in hand. But ultimately, we're also moving the body, okay, quite large muscle actions, aren't we? Okay, so for diving, you could justify and say that it needs to be in this area here, this kind of medium arousal level. We don't want to be too high in terms of arousal because that's going to impact the diver's performance. Okay, but ultimately they need to make sure that they time, for example, their movements accurately before they enter the water. But also they don't want to be too low because if they're too low, then they're not going to be able to move their body quick enough. They're going to be a bit too flimsy in their action. Okay, and ultimately a diver needs to make sure that their muscles are tense, that they look good. It's aesthetically pleasing, isn't it? So we need to be somewhere in here, in towards this medium bit. So if you could justify that, okay, that would have obviously got you the mark for this section here. So, controlling arousal levels. So ultimately, as I said there, the diver, for example, or gymnast, they need to be able to control arousal levels. And ultimately, any performer does, don't they? They need to be able to control their state of alertness and readiness. We can do that in two different ways, okay, two methods. So one through cognitive, okay, to do with the mind, and we can also look at strategies for somatic, what we refer to as the body physical, okay, so in terms of controlling our arousal levels. So one way is looking at deep breathing. Okay, so this technique obviously involves sort of exaggerating our breaths in and out. Okay, by the performer. You can see Cristiano Ronaldo there standing before he's about to take that free kick. Okay, he'll be practicing at this stage here some deep breathing. So our top part of our body should be relaxed. It should be fairly slow in regards to our deep breaths. And ultimately, this helps control arousal levels because we focus on things like our thoughts. Okay, what the task is on hand. Cristiano Ronaldo focusing on that ball. Where is he going to strike it specifically? What is he looking to do in regards to how he wants to get that ball over the wall and perhaps into the goal? And ultimately, this will also control his nerves. It will also, as I said, maintain that focus and concentration, and it might reduce a little bit of muscle tension. We don't know what minute of the game this is. It could be the first minute, it could be the 89th minute. If it's the 89th minute, okay, there could be quite a lot of muscle fatigue. So it's a case of recovering in those 10 to 15 seconds, okay, 20 seconds before the shot has been struck, okay, to hopefully help him succeed in scoring that goal. Next, let's look at mental rehearsal. Okay, and ultimately, we've got three types, of mental rehearsal that we can look at. Mental rehearsal itself, we can look at visualization, and we can also look at imagery. So these are all kind of similar techniques. Ultimately, they're to do with the mind, okay, the cognitive, and first of all, if we look at mental rehearsal, we basically picture ourselves as the performer of performing that skill perfectly before we attempt the task. So a gymnast, for example, might rehearse in her or his mind, okay, doing that front flip, okay, tuck front flip, for example, before they actually do it off the vault. Okay, so they're rehearsing it, they're replaying it in their mind before they actually do it. They might pick up on some past experiences as they do that as well. And that kind of links into imagery. Okay, so imagery also involves this recreating a good past performance. So we might imagine ourselves previously in some good past performances and we recreate that in our mind, okay, to hopefully boost our confidence perhaps. If we remember a task and a time when we completed that difficult move, then that's going to help us in regards to our confidence. We might also place ourselves in a calm and relaxed place during this stage, again, to ensure that our arousal levels don't go too high and we don't get too high levels of anxiety. And finally, visualization. This is this idea of we imagine ourselves in just a relaxed setting, in an actual place of calm and comfort. Okay, and that again looks to control our arousal levels. Okay, we might do that as part of some sort of meditation session, for example, okay, or we just try and visualize ourselves. Even if we're out on the pitch, it can be very difficult, can't it? If we're in a changing room situation, okay, we try and visualize ourselves in a safe place. Okay, and finally, that should say, apologies there, it says self-task. It should say self-talk. Okay, so for self-talk, we're looking at a mental or cognitive technique, okay, whereby we talk to ourselves in our own mind. Okay, we do this to reassure ourselves. We do this to sometimes relax our body, relax our mind, and we do this also to provide ourselves with some encouragement, okay, and some motivation. So I want you to pause the video here, think of self-talk, think of what other verbal phrases might a sports person make and say in regards to self-talk. Okay, so things like you would have maybe come up with in terms of verbal phrases, aspects like come on, you can do this, okay, focus, and it might be another key words that you might say out on the court or on the pitch, and you might do this yourself as a performer at the moment. Okay, so hopefully you've got a few phrases like that down, but remember that self-talk can be really useful in terms of motivation and also reassuring yourself. Finally, in terms of teaching and learning strategies, I want to use some exam practice questions here, okay, especially to get the students confident in regards to how to draw the inverted U theory and also to be able to apply and justify the arousal and performance you relate as a relationship. Also, you maybe use the videos, some videos such as, for example, Mind Games, which is on Sky Sports. It's to do with cricket, okay, and it refers to In the Zone, which is quite good. And also just applying new concepts such as choking, which comes up at A level.